to the friends and family of Gary who were kind enough to welcome me into their circle just about an hour or so ago, to the Tattered cover and independent bookshops. There's none better than this. I never had the privilege of knowing Gary, and then Mark gave me the Circumstantial Man, and I read it quickly, and I realized I did know Gary. And I knew Gary as I would know a close friend. A friend who was brilliant, who had, I think we can all agree, who read his works, a wry and sometimes acerbic sense of humor. A man who was utterly honest. A man who had no patience for pettiness, for deceit, for tomfoolery. You don't know how long I've worked to work that word into a sentence. And someone who could mesmerize with his storytelling and do so in a humblingly brilliant style. As we all know, we can often be envious of our friends. And when I read The Circumstantial Man, I was envious of the way Gary could put words together. When I got the book, I said to Mark, well, you know what, I could get up and talk about myself, but I do that all the time. What I would rather do is maybe read a few passages from the book, and it would give me an opportunity to share with you, whether you've read the book or not, some brief passages, rather than reading a long 2-page section where we see a dramatic development and so forth. I thought what I would do is cherry pick a bit and find passages that kind of gave me chills when I read them, that displayed Gary's command of the art of presenting human nature and his pyrotechnic style. I'll read a few of these to you now. I instinctively touched the right-hand pocket of my pants, as I always do when approaching my car, heard the jingle of keys against keys, some of which no longer had locks to match the teeth. We all collect keys that lose their purpose. The sorting and disposal of useless keys is a minor chore that grinds Americans down. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the ring to have it ready in case the felon appeared out of nowhere, as I imagine felons habitually do. I walked into the bar. The door thumped at my back, folding the fan of white light that was blinding the patrons. I couldn't see. That was how it always was, a return to the womb, to the last moment in time when you left this place or places like this. The clock stops and the outside world ceases to exist. A liquor industry tactic going back to the invention of refuges, haunts, drinking establishments in every country. Like the language of music, universal. I paused to let my eyes again adjust to the darkness, seeing the colored lights emerging like rare, luminous, aquatic creatures. There were no other customers in the bar. I crossed the room and smiled at the bartender as I slipped onto the stool. "Mr. Larkey," he said, nodding at me. I nodded back. I knew his name was Rudy, but I never called him by his first name. I was not that sort. I did not glad hand people, speak their names, cry out like drunks in the night, "Hey, Rudy, Rudy, my glass is empty again." "What'll it be?" he said. I opened the door and stepped into the night. The sky was cloudless, the moon full. The white varnish of lunar paint illuminated the edges of everything. The leaves of the high branches in the woods beyond the property line. The sidewalk that led straight to concrete incinerators built before the burning of trash was outlawed. He spoke as I dug. He said things like, "I once read in a book that before Columbus discovered America, a squirrel could climb a tree in South Carolina and walk all the way to the Mississippi River without touching the ground." I wanted to bait him. Did he think South Carolina existed before Columbus set foot on the island, whose inhabitants he promptly misnamed? It was possible. I wanted to discuss his claims of intellectual superiority and find out if he equaled it with factual accuracy, or was he talking in more abstract terms, the self-satisfied terrain of hubris, the proud fraud of the IQ. Larky, wake up. Now it was Larky, and not the affable Mr. Larky. I no longer felt that I was in the good graces of Detective Coleman or the other policeman who had gazed upon me with polite curiosity as the evidence mounted up. Doubtless they all had judged me and found me guilty in their own minds, but this was the voice of the jailer, a different turnkey than the one who had locked me up earlier, a man who had not met me and thus had no reason to think anything other than a despicable serial killer placed under his charge. I opened my eyes and looked over the doorway where he was standing, keys in one hand, open door braced in the other. "You got a visitor, Larky. Make yourself presentable." My clothes were in disarray. I had not undressed, but apparently I had kicked off my shoes at some point during my slumber, a half-awake thing that I had done before in my life. You wake up with overheated feet, work the shoes off with your toes, forget you ever did it. I once had a bizarre skin rash on my hands that forced me to sleep with rubber gloves coated with lotion. I would wake up and find the gloves flung halfway across the bedroom, my sheets and pillowcases saturated with a medicinal stink. I sat up and put my shoes back on, stood and tucked in my shirt, tugged at my clothes, made myself presentable. I imagined I would be following orders similar to this when I was finally sentenced to the big house. I hope it was San Quentin. I had not been to California for a long time. "Who's my visitor?" I said as I exited the room and entered the hallway. "Just follow me," the cop said. I took a close look at the insignia on his sleeve, Deputy Sheriff. He was bulked up in his mid-20s, probably took himself more seriously than his job, which he apparently took very seriously. He was not going to brook any affability from a prisoner. We walked down the hallway in the opposite direction of Coleman's office. It gave me a sense that I was being disassociated from hope. I began to wonder who in this burg would come visit me. Morton? Had he recovered and left the hospital to take a last good look at me before giving a sworn affidavit to the DA that would send me up the river for life? Or maybe it was one of the garage mechanics to whom I had spoken after Morton's encounter with the underside of my car. Who did I know in this town? Well, it didn't matter. My visitor was from Albany. I nearly went into cardiac arrest when I saw Leonard P. Dexter standing in what I realized quickly was a visitor's room. You've seen them in the movies. Is there anything in life that hasn't been portrayed in the movies, including things that don't exist? Werewolves, vampires, fire-breathing dragons. And I'm going to conclude tonight with a portion from the book that I find worthy of the greatest literary writers. And in my youth, I had hoped to be a writer of something other than tawdry, sick and twisted pulp fiction, which is what I have made my métier. And I read people like John Dos Passos, Ernest Hemingway, and one of my all-time favorites, Saul Bellow, Nobel laureate. And having tried my hand at that and found it to be an abject failure, I thought back to the sayings of one of the wisest, most sage literary philosophers, Dirty Harry, aka Clint Eastwood, who, before he blew somebody away with a .44 handgun, proverbially the most powerful handgun known to man, said, a man's got to know his limitations. Well, my limitations are writing genre fiction, and I do that. I'm very, very happy doing it. But I found in admittedly the one book of Gary's that I read that he transcends genre fiction, and he writes literature. Saul Bellow, again, one of my favorite literary writers of all time, said we need to have pathos, in a good sense, emotion in the book. We need humor too. That it's easy to write about despair. It's hard to write about the human condition with humor. And that's what Gary has done. But that's not to say he doesn't touch, as Saul Bellow did, and as most fine literary authors do, does not touch on the philosophical and makes us all think. I finally looked Morton square in the eye and worked up the nerve to ask him something that only someone who had been through what he had been through could tell me. Is there an afterlife? Did you see a tunnel, a white light? Did you speak to a guide with wings? Did you review every last incriminating deal of your life? Did you go into that place? Did you see it? Morton shook his head, no. I didn't see a thing, malarkey. It was all darkness, total darkness. In fact, I don't even remember the darkness. I don't remember anything at all. Just nothingness, total nothingness. One moment I was walking along the street in front of my house, and the next moment the world ceased to exist. It was like a boat out of the blue. I knew then that he was lying. He remembered what he had told the cops. He knew he had fingered me erroneously. He was just embarrassed. He would have never brought up the boat business if he wasn't ashamed of his misinterpretation of the facts. Change the subject, create a diversion, make me laugh. But who among us hasn't been embarrassed? Who among us has never misinterpreted facts? Who among us has never peered into the abyss and come away red-faced? Cab drivers, garage mechanics, losers, sociopaths, we all make mistakes. We all seek forgiveness. We all realize we should have done things differently. But maybe that's the reason we were born. Maybe that's our purpose for life, to learn how to do things differently. As good a pointless answer as any.